Hello, New Zealand. I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is episode 55. And tonight the plan is to discuss the latest political polling and why are females more likely to vote for left-wing parties, not our panellists, of course. Is Victoria University trying to destigmatise pedophilia? Are boot camps really that mean and nasty as claimed? And should we be concerned about the latest euthanasia report? Now, that's the plan. But we're going to start with the open letter signed by 400 plus church leaders calling on MPs to vote down the Treaty Principles Bill. We're also going to ask historian Professor Paul Moon for his take on the open letter. But before we do that, let's meet the panel tonight. And we have got a full house. Firstly, Peter, it looks like you're coming from somewhere new. Have you shifted house or have you done some maintenance, spring cleaning?
No, I've gone from my laptop to my desktop. As a consequence, the shot that you see of me is not angled towards the roof. It's just straight back towards my bookcase. You probably don't get an appreciation of the art on the wall in this little office, but there you go.
It makes you look more academic, so that's good. Yeah. To your left is Dr. Ate Moala. How are you?
Malolele, I am very good. Thank you, Bob.
Good. And below you, not even sweating, even though I know he sprinted into his studio.
It literally just shut the door and checked the phones on. Bob.
Brendan Malone in Rangiora, just about swore there, in Rangiora, who was putting family first and was at a school function. What happened? Did you get suspended or how come you got out early?
No, I'm trying to avoid the principal's office. I had too many trips there when I was younger. But I was at a beautiful father-son sex education event. It was just great with my boy. It was a real beautiful thing, actually. Really good.
Oh, who was that run by?
Loving for Life. Great New Zealand group. Doing some great work.
Fantastic program. And I wish more schools had it. And I'd like to do a little bit more promo on that because, great program, Loving for Life. To your right, always on the right, is Simon O'Connor. How are you, Simon?
I'm doing very well, although I'm going to miss those angelic lights that used to be around Peter's head while he was on the panel. So the whole...
Yeah, although I noticed that you seem to have more certificates up there, Simon. Are you trying to impress us or something? Did you grab your wife's as well?
Yeah, my wife's are there. Look, every week I just go and photocopy a few more and I just, eventually all will be full.
Yeah, it looks impressive. And finally, Dr. Reverend Michael Reid in Christchurch. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, thanks, Bob, and good evening, everyone.
Right, well, we're going to get straight into it. I'm not even going to do an image or a video of the day because we've got a lot to get through, and I suspect that we might spend a little bit of time on this extra one that I sent to you all this morning. More than 400 Christian leaders, including senior leaders of the Catholic, Anglican and Methodist denominations in New Zealand, have signed an open letter calling on MPs to vote down the treaty's principal bill, which hasn't actually been tabled yet. In fact, they don't even want it to go to Select Committee for public input. Now, according to David Seymour, quote, the Treaty Principles Bill would restore the mana of our founding document by ensuring it delivers what it originally promised in 1840, the same rights and duties for all New Zealanders. That's from their website, which is treaty.nz, I think. Now, National and New Zealand First have said they would not support it beyond its first reading. And the open letter released today by some new organisation, which I hadn't heard of, called Common Grace Aotearoa, expressed the Christian leaders' opposition to the bill and their commitment to Te Tiriti. Panel, I will come to you shortly because I know that you're raring to go on this one. Peter put out a Substack. I think, Simon, you were on RCR doing some commentary about it as well. But we do have a special guest just to kick this off. And my guest is Professor Paul Moon from AUT, who's certainly a specialist in this area, a lot of commentary and a lot of books on it. Paul, really appreciate your time. Surely a treaty by its nature has multiple interpretations, and it's a treaty after all between lots of different people. Are we allowed to actually debate this?
The treaty's been debated literally since day one. If you look at the events at Waitangi that morning and the preceding day for that matter, the chiefs were debating not only with the Crown but among themselves as to what it meant. And that debate's been ongoing for all sorts of reasons. The poor way in which the treaty was written, the even more impoverished way in which it was explained. So absolutely, the debate comes with the treaty, that they're two sides of the same coin almost.
Okay, because it's sort of, from this open letter, we sort of get the impression that the debate has been settled we can't revisit this, and yet my understanding is that the bill, and interestingly enough, there is no bill. We haven't seen the bill yet, so they're actually opposing something that they haven't actually read yet. I mean, that's slightly ironic, isn't it?
I think these so-called church leaders have made a number of critical mistakes. Firstly, they've described themselves as church leaders, and if you go down the list of people who have signed it, not all of them are. I'm not sure if they're aware of that or if that's just a deception by omission. I don't know. But beyond that, if I wanted some advice on my health, I wouldn't necessarily go to a plumber. If I wanted to fix my car, I wouldn't go necessarily to a GP. I'd approach the person who knows about it. And if I want advice on treaty issues, I certainly wouldn't go to some self-professed experts in various churches. It's interesting too that I've had a lot of communications this morning from people who belong to some of these churches, Catholics, for example, who are absolutely outraged. They said, we never gave our consent for our leaders to speak on our behalf in this way. So there's issues of who does this group represent? What do they understand? Did they get consent for it? Are they all 400 purporting to be church leaders in the sense of leading denominations? There's a whole lot of faults with it.
Okay, now they do use some terms like, if we let this debate go ahead, there will be harm, it'll affect social cohesion. To be honest, to me, that sounds very woke. I mean, shouldn't the church actually be promoting free speech?
What we've got to be very careful of is when anyone says we shouldn't discuss something because harm will result. Because then you have to go to the question, well, who's going to produce that harm? Who's going to cause that harm? And critically, who's using harm to stifle free speech? That's the first point. Second point is there's something odd about this in terms of these individuals, and we'll call them individuals, purporting that the church has a position on this, because it's interesting, the same individuals never seemed particularly concerned when it came to ACT's policies on other areas like euthanasia and abortion. And you would expect they would have done similar public statements, but they didn't. So this is very much a highly politicized thing by a very small sector, I think, of the church.
Yeah. Just finally, Paul, the great irony to me is that some church leaders, and I say some church leaders, they're speaking into this political issue, but at the same time, they're also saying that others should be silenced because we shouldn't have the debate. Am I wrong to see some irony there?
Absolutely, and they have no right at all to stifle debate, to tell people in their pews, this is what you can and can't discuss. That's objectionable. And I'd be very anxious if I belonged to any organisation where someone told me you can't talk about this.
So just finally, for those watching tonight, as believers, is it okay to actually debate these issues? Are we allowed to sit down and say, actually, what did the Treaty of Waitangi mean and what does it mean today? Is that okay for us to do that?
I think it's almost mandatory. I would imagine if we're in a country where the treaty plays such a big role, we ought to have those discussions. But we ought not to be in a position where we're told by these self-appointed leaders that this is what you can and can't discuss. The other thing too is that there's such a multiplicity of views. It's not a one view or the other. This is very much on a spectrum. So they've oversimplified what's a far more complex dialogue.
Paul, really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, that was a good way to start. Let's get straight into it, panel. And I'm going to come to the clergy on the panel, which of course is Reverend Dr. Michael Reid from Christchurch. And Michael, I did have a really close look at the signatories and couldn't find your name on it. Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, because it's not there, Bob, and it wouldn't be there. And I just endorse what Paul has said. Look, the clergy and other people in the church or in any organisation for that matter in a liberal democracy are entitled to have their say. And they're entitled to publish a letter and, as any citizen is. But what concerns me, so much concerns me about this, Bob. I think what Paul said, any church leader that's trying to influence the nature of debate in the nation, and implicitly, as Paul pointed out, the impression is that they're speaking for their parishioners, and we just don't do that. We just don't do that sort of thing. Bob, I'm really concerned that the sort of narrative that lies behind the letter is a view of the treaty coming from Alistair Rees and others, many others, that this is a sacred covenant, that it's akin to a marriage. And once you get that sort of view popularised, then the whole debate shifts from history, which is what Paul and other commentators talk about. It shifts from history to a sort of an untouchable status. You can't talk about it. And these people think that that perspective is correct, that it's got a Mount Sinai-like status, and it hasn't. I remember some years ago, Tariana Turia tried to say that the treaty was comparable to the Ten Commandments, but that didn't get much traction. But Bob, I'm an historian, and this is history that we need to understand. And as Paul said there, and he's quite right, there are many different views. In the last 20 or 30 years, we've had activists, academics, and judges giving their views. But about a year ago, we had an election, and the people spoke, and they wanted to move away from the view of the previous government. And not that everyone voted for ACT, of course, but, in an open, free and tolerant society, we can debate these things. And these people are trying to lead the debate. And as I say, they're entitled to publish their views, but they do not speak for all churches or church leaders. And I think as a parish minister myself, I mean, I respect the views of my people. They are different, and they're entitled to those views. But yeah, I find this quite disappointing, Bob. But I'm particularly concerned that the narrative that's being bought into is that the treaty is untouchable, according to their interpretation, and it's got this covenantal Sinai/marriage covenant sort of perspective that they're trying to popularise. And I just don't buy that, and I think a lot of Kiwis don't buy it. I think Kiwis want a debate, an open, sensible, rational debate about this thing. And it's not actually true to say that Seymour's perspective is anti-treaty. That's not true. He is a libertarian. He wants to put it out there and have the debate. And I think, Bob, that's a good thing. And I think that's what most people voted for too.
Okay, somebody has said, where can we read the letter? And you can actually go to the website commongrace.nz. commongrace.nz, and that's the organisation that I hadn't heard of. They actually seem to focus on a number of interesting areas, including creation and climate justice, economic justice, and te tiriti justice. And so that's the group. So commongrace.nz. Peter, you did a Substack on it. What was your message?
Well, I think the word that stuck out for me when I read the story about it first thing this morning, Bob, was sacred. Essentially, this group of church leaders, Christian church leaders, saying the Treaty of Waitangi is sacred. Now, I'm not a devout Christian, but I've been raised a Christian, and I've gone to church in both the Presbyterian and Catholic denominations during the course of my life. So I know a little bit about the Christian message, and to me, the only sacred document in Christianity is that tome called the Bible. And for people who are ordained ministers and pastors and cardinals and archbishops to say that the Treaty of Waitangi is attaining the status of the Bible, to me, is just patent nonsense. The other thing is that we live in a liberal democratic society, as Michael has pointed out, and that free speech is the absolute tenet, the most important tenet of that free and liberal society that we live in. Freedom of speech, freedom of association. For this group of 400, and I don't know what percentage of so-called church leaders in New Zealand that represents, I don't know how many ordained ministers we have across the Christian denominations in this country. Maybe it represents 10%, maybe it represents less than that, I don't know. But for them to say, we don't even want this bill to go to the select committee, to me is just outrageous, because we need to have this discussion. we need for all New Zealanders to be able to have their say on the treaty principles. We had this phrase inserted into legislation in 1975, again in 1986 in the State-Owned Enterprises Act, and in, I think it's 55 pieces of legislation now, we have this phrase about the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. Yet no legislation has ever defined what they are. Remember that Parliament is the sovereign, the ultimate lawmaker in this country. So far, we've just allowed these principles to be devolved to the courts, to academia, the Treaty of Waitangi, activist judges, people in the media. They're the ones who have come up, and public servants, they're the ones who have come up with this group of principles that apparently we're all supposed to know. I would like them legislated for so that everybody can be on the same page as to what the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are. Sadly, I don't think we're going to reach it through this bill, but we've got to keep on having the discussion, and this whole thing has got to go at least to the Select Committee.
Yeah, and look, just facetiously, I'd say that when Chloe Schwarbrick comes out and supports something, then probably you need to revisit what you've just done. But anyway, that's just me. Ate, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, there's a lot of noise that has been created. As you said, that this hasn't even gone into a bill yet. And I think this group is just looking for a platform with their woke agenda. Interesting that they label themselves as church leaders and no one know who they are. I'm also interested that these people had never spoke up about euthanasia, abortion, same-sex marriage. All of a sudden, they picked this up as something for them to have an opinion about. I think it's important that the next generation understand what this is about. But definitely not from these cowboys. So, that's what I think. I think it's important that we look back at the history, and if we need, as all of us know, that the Māori version of the treaty is different from the English version, and that right from the start is problematic.
Bob,
Bob,
can I just come in there? Sorry, I just feel to add something what Ate said there about the selective morality of church leaders. They didn't speak up about Jacinda Ardern's rushed abortion bill. They didn't speak up, haven't spoken up about euthanasia and issued a letter. They haven't spoken
I think it's probably
about
important, Michael, for us to say perhaps most or some, because there were some names in that list that I recognise that have spoken.
Certainly, Bob, and I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah.
But just think something when you're talking there, Ate, in the 1960s, there was a Marxist theorist called Herbert Marcuse, and he was a Frankfurt School Marxist. He was a refugee from Europe, and he found his feet in America, and he had this concept called repressive tolerance. And anything that supports the left is to be embraced, and anything that pulls down the established order is to be supported. And so this, what we're seeing, Bob, 50, 60 years on, we're seeing what was the preserve of Marxist theorists in the 60s. It's just all mainstream now, and it's sad when it gets to the church, I think. Liberating tolerance. Liberating tolerance, not repressive tolerance.
Yeah, and I think, for Family First, we've always entered the debate and said, look, it's going to go through the process. Let's get as many people submitting as possible. Even now, I know Simon helped us, put out a message to our supporters talking about getting involved in the review of the euthanasia law and the transgender human rights issue. So we've got to be involved in the process, but this is actually saying stop the process because we don't want this debate because it's going to be so divisive, apparently. Brendan, what was your take on it?
Well, there's two things for me, I think. One is I'm actually okay with church leaders engaging in the public square. I think we've laboured well, exactly. And I think we've laboured too long under a culture where the church has been far too silent. We've got a lot of wisdom to share with the culture, and we need to stop shutting up. We actually need to be present. However, I don't think they've made a particularly compelling case here. And I will say I know some of the names on that list, and they are genuinely good people, and some of them have been very active on some of those issues like euthanasia and abortion. And they are, I know some good people on that list, and even though I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything theologically with them, I do have regard and respect for them. So I think that's important to point out. But the thing I think we need to be cautious about here is, and I think, Michael, you've alluded to this already, is that the moment a church leader represents themselves in politics as a church leader and puts that particular focus on it, like, this is a non-essential issue. There is no essential Christian moral principle or commandment or doctrine that is at stake here. So there can be prudential judgments on both sides. Christians could legitimately and in good faith disagree with each other about this question, and they would not be violating Christianity in any way whatsoever. And so you've got to be very careful when you wade in that what you don't end up doing is actually creating a form of spiritual abuse, where you say, if you don't agree with me, you're not agreeing with Jesus and the gospel. And at that point, I'm now creating a spiritual abuse where I'm effectively telling you that your salvation or your Christianity is in doubt or in danger if you don't support my position. And although they haven't explicitly said that, the danger is that as a leader, when you wade into these non-essentials in this way, you can actually create that sort of implication and perception, and that is not a good thing at all. I just don't think they've made a compelling case for me. And as I said, there are some really good people there. I love their hearts and their heart for people, but I think in this case that there's not a strong case that this shouldn't be talked about. We can have a robust discussion, and we can talk about controversial issues, I think, without riots and violence in the street or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay, as you can imagine, the comments are piling in. If you do want to comment, you need to do it on our YouTube channel or on our Family First Facebook page. Those are the two that come to my computer, and it's overcooking and steaming up on my right here, so that'll be interesting. One thing, Simon, I want to find out what you think. The group that sort of sponsored this, and gee, I wish I could get some open letters on the front page of the New Zealand Herald. That was pretty impressive. But Common Grace is a registered charity and doing political lobbying. And, they're registered. Funny that. Probably because they're not talking about family and mums and dads and traditional marriage, maybe. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Simon, what do you reckon?
Well, on that point, I've never heard of them before, but, if you had to go broad, it's all the woke topic: economic justice, climate justice, and the treaty. So what makes it particularly or specially Christian is lost on me. They're just that convenient Christianity, which is quite palatable in the modern culture. And that in itself tells you something. If the gospel message is meant to be countercultural and challenging, organizations like this, which really are just swimming with the woke tide, are a problem. Look, the letter's out of place. It's not correct on a number of levels. The views are perfectly fine. If people want to have that view, they're welcome to it. Those church leaders and others, and by the way, they're not all church leaders, they're welcome to have their opinion, but I think they've misrepresented it as leadership. Because actually I find a lot of those priests, bishops, vicars, and others are going to find quite a lot of annoyed congregants this weekend, because actually they are misappropriating the position of the church, which really doesn't have a view directly on this. The other is, I might add, Bob, the letter is actually quite insulting to Christians and New Zealanders in general, because the 400 that have written have basically said, look, we've got our opinion, we'll thrust it into the public space and demand you listen to us, while simultaneously saying that no one else should be allowed to speak about this, not even MPs, because they're worried. They're worried that there's going to be a problem with social cohesion and a problem around harm. So what they're explicitly saying, whether they realize it or not, is that everyone else but them are a bunch of idiots, and that all of us, including their congregants, are going to rise up to destroy our country, to break the cohesion, and to cause harm. So they've insulted basically everybody else in the country. And from a theological point of view, if I might, one, they're buying into Marxist theology. I think, that's been hinted at by Michael and others. And the other is they're ultimately indulging in an idolatry here. If you wanted to get theological for a moment, at the end of the day, they're trying to put this treaty onto the same level as a covenant. Well, the hint's in the title. It's not the covenant of Waitangi, it's the Treaty of Waitangi, which means there's at least two parties, and it's complicated, as Dr. Moon said. It's always going to be full of controversy. It's like married life. There's always, tensions and debates. It's not a covenant. And actually what these church individuals have done is elevated this treaty to the level of a God-given covenant. And they also suggest, by the way, that this treaty is the way to effectively redemption and to reconciliation. And that's why I use the word idolatry, because if you come out of the Christian tradition, there's only one sacred text, and that's the scriptures. And there's only one way to salvation, and that's through Jesus Christ. And to put it really bluntly and crudely, the Treaty of Waitangi ain't going to save your soul, and it's probably not going to save New Zealand. Controversial enough?
Oh, look, the whole lot of you have been controversial. Let me just read some of the comments, and then I will just come around, and if any of you want a right of reply, a brief right of reply, before we move on to the next topic. But there has been, as you can imagine, lots of stuff coming through. Sue's appreciative that we're doing up to the minute subject matter. Yes, the panels often get last-minute texts on a Monday saying, we're doing this topic. Lynette says, great Substack, Peter, well done. Kirstein's got out the popcorn, so obviously expecting some action here. Neil says, wonderful to hear from Professor Moon, slightly outraged Catholic here. Surely this treaty debate is a matter of individual conscience. Jeffrey said, where can I see a copy of the letter? So that is commongrace.nz. Kirstein alluded to what I said earlier. Most mainstream media published this today, which is always a bit of a red flag. Liz says, I'm wondering where these people were when we had the mandates and the lockdowns. Crickets from many leaders at that time. Ben Peter wants you in the pulpit. And Rebecca says you're bang on as well. Joe says, well done, church leaders, for stepping up to the plate, as you said, Brendan. Quite right. Nancy Margaret says they are activists behaving like most activists do. This is about having principles to work with, not stuff that is made up as they go along with what is happening to date. Evan says, well done, Brendan. So your fan club's there. Rebecca says the wokeness is driving people away from Christianity. Stuart's in Parakai, so he's probably in the hot balls. So yeah, bless you too. Mike says they sound like zealots. How dare the plebs be allowed a view? And Andrea says, sounds like the government, what they did to us during COVID, shut us down, no debate, do as they say. I mean, the line that stunned me, and somebody pushed back on me and said, look, they're entitled to a view just as you are. And I said, exactly, but it's this line. It says, we oppose the bill. We call on all members of Parliament to do everything in their power to not take this bill to select committee. Simon, you're in Parliament for 12 years. Have you had groups actually say, look, we shouldn't even put it to the public for their debate? I mean, select committee has always been the kind of the release valve so that controversial stuff, the government can say, well, at least we consulted the people.
Look, you'll always have individuals and groups who will say that. And actually, it's often at the first reading, the Parliament decides whether something does or does not go to select committee. And actually, more often than not, MPs will vote something to select committee to allow the public to have their say. I think what's egregious about this is that self-proclaimed, in many but not all instances, church leaders purporting to speak for the Christian church have the audacity, if not hypocrisy, to give their view, to have it amplified delightedly by mainstream media, and then in effect, as you've read, to say no one else should have a say. And as I mentioned earlier, they are implicitly, if not explicitly, saying that everybody else, including their congregants, have views which are too dangerous to be discussed. So when these church individuals suggest to you and I, and through their letter, that they're worried about social cohesion and they're worried about harm, they are saying to you and I, everyone on the panel and everyone else in New Zealand, that your views on this topic are too dangerous, but they know best. So stuff them.
Okay. Peter, did you have anything to add?
No, I just hope that when this bill comes up for its first reading in the Parliament, that it does go to Select Committee. The Select Committee is going to be chaired by the young first-term MP from Rangitata, James Meager, young man in his 30s, who is Māori. So he's going to be in the chair at the Justice Select Committee. And David Seymour told me last week those hearings are going to go on for 6 months. So there will be plenty of opportunity for much oxygen to be expounded during those select committee hearings. So I look forward to that time.
Okay. Michael, I know you had 2 shots, but I thought you might just like this comment from your mate Rex Ardar, one of our panellists, who's obviously watching. He says the church has no need to speak on a non-essential, as Brendan said, and church leaders are speaking ex cathedra without proper authority and in their personal capacity. Would that be your understanding, Michael?
Oh, I think well said, Rex. Rex has got a great gift for summing things up very concisely, hasn't he? And I think he's on the money there. Quite right.
Okay. Brendan, any final comments before we move on?
Yeah, I think that's 2 things for me. Number one is I looked at the list of names and I couldn't see a single Catholic bishop. So for those who are wondering about that point, and that is, that's where the authority lies at the local level, your local Catholic bishop, you're a Catholic. Secondly, I would say don't forget that this could be a very divisive thing in the church if we allow it to be that. And I think our obligation is be people of goodwill. We can disagree without causing disruption and divisions of our own. And I think that's the way forward, to try and encourage. If we want genuine debate, let's invite people into the dialogue on our end as well.
Okay. Ate, did you have any final comment before we move on?
There are not many Pacific names in there. Thank God for that. But I mean, this is not unusual where Pacific people are not invited into this debate. But I just wonder whether, I don't know who all the people are, but I think of when Jacinda was pushing through the abortion law. There was no process. It was just shoved through. When the COVID laws were just keep changing, it was the most divisive thing for this country. So I just hope that people will remember that.
Yep. Peter, did you have a point to make before we moved on? Did you see that hand raised?
I'm just responding to a comment of Brendan's. Remember back in the famous Lands case of 1987 when Justice Robin Cook, when he first brought up the word partnership in relation to the Treaty of Waitangi, remember he said the treaty is akin to a partnership and it behoves both the Crown and Maori to act in good faith towards each other. And that is a line which we don't hear too much about, 37 years later, because I get the feeling there's not a lot of good faith going on in this debate. There certainly wasn't good faith from these supposedly faithful people today.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, well done. You've just cancelled me from any church ever inviting me to speak again, so thanks, team. That's awesome. Let's move on to the next topic. And let's just have a look at the latest polls, because if you believe the noise around the media, it is that this government is the worst government in the history of governments, and Chris Hipkins is just lining up to be the next Prime Minister after a snap election in 3 days. But in fact, if you look at the polls, up the top there is Blue. National has slightly increased. Labor has a little bit of an increase. The Greens have gone down because of the shambles with a number of their MPs. A little bit down on ACT. And New Zealand First is doing quite well. So if you combine the left and the right, so the Blue is National, ACT and New Zealand First, they've actually increased, and Labor, Greens, Maori Party have decreased. But here's the interesting thing that you might want to comment on as well, team, is that when you look at the gender breakdown, I've circled it there, you will find that women are much more likely to vote for Labour, Greens and the Māori Party, and men are much more likely to vote for National, ACT and New Zealand First. Now, I know that Ate is not amongst that group of women. Why are women more likely to vote for left-wing parties, Ate?
All right. I think the National is rising due to the fact that they've been quite vocal on the things that most Kiwis care about. I mean, they're serious about crime, telling the councils to stop the wasteful spending, pushing for higher education, sorting out our roads. But whether they can deliver, whether National can deliver that, I'm not sure, because it's early days, them trying to reverse the mess that the Labour government had done. With regard to the media, the lying media, they are left-leaning, we all know that. So it just, not many people trust them. So it's just a proof yet again how irrelevant the mainstream media have become. With regard to women, well, as the many women that I know, we are definitely not voting for Labour or the left. And I just wonder, Bob, whether some of those may have been former males, but they have got so confused and maybe self-identifying as women, and they are voting as women. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. Okay, well, I spoke to Simon and I said that I thought most of the women had deserted voting for National since Simon was no longer part of National. I'm not sure if you guys agree with that. Simon, would you agree with that the women's vote has just deserted National because you're not there anymore?
Well, the prima facie case would be that all the women would be streaming to National now that I've gone. Look, I don't think there's any surprises. Even the poll, just the way it's constructed, it's only a 1% change for National. I'm not trying to take away from that. That's better than a kick in the pants. But overall, actually, the polls are relatively stable. There's not much change. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. People are generally not engaged with politics at the moment. They're too busy trying to, look after the kids. We're coming out of winter, thinking about your job and so forth. That's a general impression. And around the whole gender split, I think I joked with you that there needed to be like 257 columns rather than this binary split. But that aside, women more predominantly going left and men to the right has been there for years. And, to put it really simply, men tend to lean into the more let's fix the economy and law and order side, where women in general, I said polls that go back many, many years, decades in fact, are much more on that caring side. So they seem to be more responsive to Labour messaging and Green Party messaging. So again, I don't see any surprise in that. If it flips, then I'll be definitely taken aback.
Yeah. Okay. Brendan, you must know how women think. Why are they more likely to vote left?
Yes. I tried to write a book on that once and didn't get very far.
One piece of paper.
Yeah, I learned very wisely, yes. 100 years of study, still don't know. So basically, this is actually a consistent trend around the world, actually. There is a big, and one of the more troubling things, actually, is amongst younger men and women, there is a widening gap in left and right. So it's not just that women are leaning left, but the gap is widening. However, I did see some quite interesting commentary from some women who replied to that on an American poll that showed similar results. And they said, don't panic. I was quite a progressive woman. Then I met this really good-looking guy who was conservative, and I shifted more towards my my new husband's positions on issues. So that seems to be a bit of a trend. Men do have a bit of power in this regard. In regards to why, I think Simon's hit the nail on the head. I think what you have is that feminine genius, which is that emotional intelligence, and the left, I would say now more often plays on that. It's not really authentic. They talk about compassion, they talk about tolerance, the things that people want to see, but they are some of the most uncompassionate and tolerant people you'll meet when the mask is off and they're online and they're speaking quite frankly. And so I think they play on that a lot. And I think for a lot of women, it pulls at the heartstrings and they're drawn towards that. It's not a bad thing. But I think that what we need is that beautiful complementarity here of men and women. So that the feminine genius and the heart that is drawn towards, compassion and mercy and love a bit more strongly, and the men who have a sense of justice and look, things must also be done and we must roll up our sleeves and get on with the tough business that must be done. And we need both and, not either or. So, I think it's the left is very good at playing at the heartstrings. Not often they're very insincere. A lot of virtue signalling from them.
Okay, and it's not just a New Zealand issue, it's actually Western culture in general.
Yeah, it's all around the West. And there's a big debate, actually. Unfortunately, some quarters have gone into very unhealthy territory now, and there are some people on the right debating, well, does this prove women should have never got the vote? Because look, they're just they're so compromised emotionally, they sell us out all the time. That's not a good response, but it's a growing and very noticeable trend.
Okay. Well, before I read out some of these comments, I'm just going to find a helmet because I suspect I might need one. But before I do that, Peter, any idea why you think women are more likely to vote left and men right?
I did a bit of research in my household today, Bob, and I had a very short, sharp answer. It was something along the lines of, I don't know. I'm certainly not part of that, whatever it is, 60%. So that's good to know. I'm glad that my wife and I are on the same political page.
Good indoctrination there, Peter. Well done.
Yes. I think one of the key aspects of this is higher education, Bob. Around the Western world now, the number of females in universities outranks males by, in general terms, about 60% to 40%. So in other words, there are nearly a third more females in universities around the Western world than there are males. We know that universities around the Western world have a faculty, teaching staff, which is leaning more and more to the left, and you would say indoctrinating, teaching far more left-wing / socialist / Marxist type thinking. So we have thousands, literally, of university graduates exiting our universities every year, going out into the workforce and finding that they are far more qualified than the men. There was that fascinating piece that you forwarded to us today, Bob, written by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the Somalian-born Dutch-American writer, who suggests that there is now this other condition, which I'd never heard of until today, called female hypergamy. I think that's how you pronounce it. It essentially means that women will not marry below or not go into a relationship with a man below their academic or qualification status, which means there's an awful lot of lonely males out there. So there's a lot of highly qualified women who have been indoctrinated during their university years who are just left-leaning as they go into the workforce, leaving the poor old blokes behind, and that's being reflected in the polls as well. I'd also make one other comment, and you can knock me over with a misogynist feather here, Bob. But, you know, I believe that women at heart want to be mothers. This was something I hadn't thought too much about, but Tucker Carlson espouses this theory. He says there's an awful lot of highly qualified, highly paid, very wealthy women in their 30s, 40s and 50s in the workforce, particularly in the United States. And they're frustrated to heck because they've missed the chance to have children. And I think of my own family situation. You know, I have the mother of my children decided she wanted to be at home to look after those children when they were preschoolers. The mothers of my grandchildren, they tried to go back to work after their first child, sometimes after their second child as well. But essentially, they came to the conclusion that being a mother is a very, very important job. And I would say, and again, you shoot me with your misogynist bullets if you wish, but I maintain that being a mother is the most important job a woman can do. And I believe that there's an awful lot of women who are missing out on that particular job, and they become unhappy as a consequence.
Okay, you're sounding more like J.D. Vance every day, so I'm going to ring Trump and say if he needs a vice president, just to give Peter Williams a call. Actually, you remind me of, was it Kansas City Chiefs, what's his name, Butker?
Harrison Butker.
Taylor's boyfriend.
Yeah.
Harrison.
No, not Taylor Swift's boyfriend. No, Harrison's got a brain. Harrison Butker, who was the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, and he got up in front of his school and said that the marriage and motherhood are more important than work for most women, which of course set off the left and the mainstream media. They just about couldn't contain themselves. Anyway, Michael, you've done a bit of a survey amongst your house as well and just found out what they think on this issue as well?
No, I have to confess I haven't, Bob. But in a culture that doesn't even know what a woman is, I think it's perhaps not really a valid comparison here, really. I don't know, you could argue perhaps unfairly that women see political issues perhaps a bit more emotively, and the left is pretty good at hitting in at emotive issues. It's interesting that Christopher Luxon talks hard economics, and so I don't know if that's a bloke thing or not, Bob, really, but yeah. But it's interesting that, despite any gains that these graphs are showing for the right of politics, but we have to remember that all mainstream legacy media appointments are from the previous government, really, and they're determined to push the previous government's narratives. And so they just keep pulling down anything that this government is trying to do. For me, that's the more serious issue, and it's a very deep-seated concern, of course, with mainstream legacy media.
Okay, look, we've got a pile of comments as well, and don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger. So Craig says, as I've said before, women are idealistic, men are realistic. When they buy a car, men worry about the engine, women worry about the colour. Fact. Jacob says, women vote with their emotions, not with their brains. Where's my helmet? Cinia says, malo ate. Ronnie says, woman is feelings, men are facts. Rudy says, the Bible can answer that one. Eve was deceived, enough said. Betty says, women vote with their feelings. Now, note, Betty is a woman. Well, I think so. Donna Lee says, well, not all women vote left, Bob. Thank you for that assurance. Exactly. Rebecca, I think once women have children, they become more right-leaning. Correct? Darwin says, I recommend all the girls watch Megyn Kelly for good conservative female commentary. Neil says, I wonder what Margaret Thatcher would say. New Zealand Kiwi says, women are waking up to the fact that the left are dangerous for their children's future. Polly says, as a woman, I don't know any woman who vote left. Perhaps they're making up the poll. Louise says, women tend to fall for, is that the one I got up? Yeah. Women tend to fall for the gender ideology nonsense, which is such twisted compassion. Mike says, families matter. Well, there's a good name for a show. Simon, why don't you use that? Neil says, well said.
Plagiarism.
Well said, Peter. Sania also says, well done, Peter. Gosh, you got a lot of praise tonight, Peter. You're going to go to bed with a big head. Yvette says, men need to speak out more strongly, showing in support of women and children, natural protectors. Ely says, as a woman and a mother who had 2 kids in my 40s, I agree with you, Peter. Women have shot ourselves in the foot with toxic feminism. And I didn't proofread this one, so I'm a bit worried, but it says, Nomi says, Peter, I just have a question about all those lonely males you mentioned. Me and my flatmate were just wondering where we could find them. We're located in Christchurch. That's the problem. There's no decent men in Christchurch, Michael?
Bob, there's a photo there with a cat, so I don't know, a cat lady photo is not a good start. If I can just offer a bit of unwelcome advice, perhaps.
Okay, I knew you guys were going to take...
those guys need to get as a university degree, then they might
exactly. I knew you guys were going to take ages on these 2 topics, so we are going to finish with the euthanasia one, because I know Brendan's done a bit of work on this, and it is an urgent topic with a review coming up, but let's just take a quick ad break.
If you're looking for news that you can trust, commentary on key family and social issues, and conservative conversations, go no further. Family First has them all. Monday nights, live at 8 p.m, Straight Talk with our panel. Tuesday mornings, live at 8 a.m, Solid Ground with Simon O'Connor. Wednesdays, watch for the latest episode of Pulse Point to drop. We watch the news so that you don't have to. Thursdays, live at 5 p.m, political playback with Bob McCoskrie and Simon O'Connor discussing the week in Parliament and politics in general. Plus, there's regular episodes of social commentary with Mick Blogg and interviews on family matters throughout the week. You can watch these live and also on demand on our website, Facebook page, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on our YouTube channel. Finally, something worth watching that you can trust. Go to familyfirst.watch for more details.
All right, let's get just into our final topic, and it is the report, the euthanasia report, which came out. Now, the interesting aspect, Brendan, I'm going to come to you first because I know you did a podcast on this, which I listened to and I got some ideas from. But the interesting thing was that we just happened to stumble across this report. It had been released just under a month before. Generally, when any of these issues like abortion, euthanasia, gay marriage, conversion therapy, when reports come out, the media are all over them because generally it's pushing a narrative that it's all fantastic, it's safe, and we should expand it. And the media have been talking about expanding the law. But this report was completely in the dead of night, and we just stumbled across it. And even now, the media don't want to talk about it. And it's because of all the red flags, isn't it, Brendan? Tell us what you found.
Yeah, you're right, the red flags. And I actually think that people have got to understand that right now with the euthanasia legislation, it's in a very tenuous place because it's still new and it's coming into a review process right now. So you don't want bad publicity, basically. And there's several big things here. Number one is there's an oversight committee, a 3-person committee that is supposed to look at every single euthanasia death report. And if they spot any problems, this is the least amount of safeguards you can have because the person has obviously already died. So you can't save them if something's, illegal's being done, but at least you can see it and you can report it. And if there's problems, they should be dealt with. They're supposed to report directly to the registrar on this particular matter. That committee has not been meeting for months. So who's looking at the death reports? That's a big red flag. That's in the latest report. There's also, they list at the very end, there's actually multiple complaints that have been laid, but 3 in particular really stuck out, and 1 is currently with the New Zealand police. So whatever happened in that situation is very serious. And so I think there's some big red flags here. One of the big things is we don't have enough concrete data. There's not enough transparency around this. And even in this report at one point, they say, look, we feel that privacy should trump matters in this case, and so we're not revealing as much information because people might figure out who's been involved in this process. Well, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't get any more serious than agents who are authorised by the state with a unique and very special power to deliberately end human life. And in this case, I think you have to have transparency over privacy. And I don't mean revealing people's personal details, but there needs to be real transparency about what's going on here. None of this is good as far as I'm concerned, and especially when you consider that the upcoming review is effectively the Ministry of Health reviewing itself on the most serious thing that they probably do in our nation, deliberately ending life on request, and they're reviewing themselves. I just don't think that's good enough.
Simon, 12 years in Parliament, is it normal that they just release these in the dark of the night? I get the impression that it's like the puberty blockers suddenly being changed, that apparently they're not reversible anymore and totally safe, so they do it when nobody's looking. What was it? They always release really important stuff on Friday night at 5 o'clock when the media's knocked off for the weekend. Do you think that's what's happening here with the whole euthanasia issue?
Yeah, very, very much so. The fact that it was done so quietly, because often there's a press release. It doesn't have to be from the minister, but from the ministry, just to draw attention to it. So yeah, very unusual. And you've indicated the why, as you say. If you've got controversial information as a government, you dump it on a Friday, or just things appear on websites. So it's one of the reasons why you need a Brendan Malone or a Family First that's sort of constantly looking for this material. I've got a Substack just competing with you, Bob. Written but not yet published around this, and everything that Brendan said's first and foremost quite correct. But a couple other really, really quick points or red flags. The numbers in the quarterly reports don't add up to the numbers in the annual reports. In other words, there's contradictory numbers, and that should be of a concern, because every number that's wrong is a human life that has been miscounted or lost. So how are they getting that wrong? Brendan's touched on the end-of-life review panel, which up to only a few weeks ago was not fully constituted. In other words, they couldn't even find 3 people to sit on this panel. There's a couple of other points, but the one I'll just leave you on, because we can't spend all night with me prattling, is only 1 in every 100 people is referred for a psychological assessment. Yeah. And that's beyond unbelievable. If you've been involved, as I have, as I'm sure many have, with end-of-life care, hospitals, hospices, it's a very emotional, stressful, often anxious, if not depressed time, not just for the person, but the family. So it's hard to believe that out of every 100 people wanting to end their lives prematurely, only 1 person displays some sort of psychological, tension, whatever the right word is, that requires a referral. It's beyond belief. And as I've written, the doctors either have no idea what they're looking for, or they're deliberately ignoring it.
Okay, just to give you an idea, that's the breakdown of the number of euthanasia basically by quarter. So you can sort of, it's pretty obvious the upward trend. The other really concerning part is that David Seymour, who is the Associate Minister of Health, said that he doesn't want to preempt what it will say, the expansion, the review, but it will give a lot of weight to making change. In other words, expanding, which I think's. I mean, Simon, sorry, can I just come back to this one for you, because you've been in the House, you know what sort of goes on. That seems a conflict of interest for a minister overseeing a review of a law to come out and basically say, gee, it's going to be expanded, it's going to get a lot of weight to make change. That's problematic, isn't it?
Well, it is on two levels. I mean, look, nothing illegal. Let's be clear about that. But it's a poor set of choices by the government to allow the architect of euthanasia to be, the man overseeing the review. Put it this way, as one of the most vocal opponents of euthanasia, it would be wrong had I been put in charge of it. You want someone slightly more neutral or perceived so. The second thing, if you don't mind flicking it back up, Bob, Seymour said the quiet bit out loud, which is that he believes they're going to give weight to the decision. They're going to, as in the ministry, is going to basically say what he wants them to. And he realized halfway through his statement, because then he had to say, without preempting. Well, of course he's preempting it. he said the quiet bit out loud.
Yeah. Ate, as a medical professional, what's the general feeling, do you think? I mean, they struggle to get doctors who want to even be involved in euthanasia, don't they? And I guess that's one of the reasons why they want to move conscientious objection, because somehow they've got to get doctors involved. But what's the general feel in the medical profession?
Yeah, they don't want to be involved. And as far as the government, the ministry hiding the data, that's not surprising. That's just how the government role, and David Seymour being at the leading at the front. So it's not surprising at all. I'm sure it's worse than what the data that they're trying to hide. I think it's the same situation everywhere. I mean, the concern is thinking that amongst the young, 4 out of 10 of those between 18 to 34, they just think that it should be available even to the homeless and the poor, for those who have disability. So this is the thinking of the next generation, because the media and what the government has been pushing they've been successful in just lying to the promoting a culture of death, which corrupts our compassion and our thinking. In the situation with the transgender mutilating surgeries, it's quite a high turnover of nurses in theatre. They just can't tolerate it. So it's really difficult to find nurses or in theatre, even the anesthetic technicians, because it's just in a place where it's supposed to give life, there is death. There is a promotion of death, and if you are called as a health worker, you go in there to give life, and in that environment of death, no one wants to hang around. So what I think, even as the government is hiding this data, we are just needing courageous men and women, boys and girls, to stand up. Health workers who said, I don't want to have a part of this. So I think this is what we needing to make a change, because we can't rely on government. They're hiding things. This is what they did with COVID. I remember they knew the side effects of myocarditis when they were pushing for the vaccine. It didn't, they knew the side effects of myocarditis, but they hid it until months later. And then they released it on the, I think it was on the 20th of December. Ashley and some of the Ministry of Health sent out a letter to the GPs. Everybody had gone home for Christmas. I mean, this is what they do on a Friday evening, a week before Christmas. And that's just, the stuff that they, just the lies. I mean, who trusts them?
Okay, Michael, what's your thoughts on this? As you do pastoral work just on the ground and just, with church families, etc., what's the general feel, do you think?
Oh, well, Bob, I mean, we totally endorse a biblical ethic of life. And I think what Ate said is so true. We now have a legalised culture of death. And I think this review that you make reference to, I think the ideological advocates of it, starting with David Seymour but many others, is really promoting this. It's moving from a possible choice to maybe even a preferable choice. And I think of the frog in the kettle syndrome. It's a big ideological push. It's anti-life. It's a culture of death, and we need to resist it. And the emphasis as we often say in this program and others, needs to be on quality palliative care and genuine compassion and empathy to journey alongside people pastorally in those very tough times as the end of life nears. But euthanasia is not what we need.
Yeah. Peter,
Bob,
just finally, I know you go on, Brendan.
But just on that point that Arte and Michael have made, there seems to be a particular issue in New Zealand. I heard a piece of commentary today from overseas. Someone described the left now as like a suicide cult. And I think when you look at things, it's sort of looking that way. But in New Zealand, just to give some context, in the last 12 months, we've had about 344 euthanasia deaths in this country. Now, just last week, New Jersey, who also have legalised euthanasia, they started in 2019, so slightly before us, similar timing. They released their annual report for the last 12 months. They had 101, so not even 3 times the number we have, and their population is 9.2 million, almost twice our population. So there is something nihilistic and unhealthy in all of this that's not good.
Yeah. Okay, Peter, just finally, I know you've been very passionate on this issue. Are you surprised to see, or not surprised to see, that they want to expand it? I mean, it was a given, wasn't it?
Well, I'm not surprised, but then I'm so often ashamed to live in this country because of government attitudes towards life and death. Only 2 weeks ago, my 93-year-old mother slipped from this earth onto the next one. It was a peaceful departure. I had a father who went in similar circumstances, 10 years ago, even further back, 28 years ago. I had a very young wife at 42 years of age die of cancer, and the palliative care that she received in her final days was outstanding. And, sometimes, sadly, people get terminal disease. And they are going to die, but there are ways to make their departure from this world painless and peaceful. And frankly, that is the way that I think that government services should be being directed, and not just basically telling somebody to take a drink and, it's all over, let's walk out the door. I just think that the whole idea of assisted dying is disgraceful. And I've believed that for many, many years now. Why does life have to be ended by an outside agency when it's going to happen to all of us at some stage? Let's make life's departure as peaceful as we can possibly do it.
Yeah.
And maybe it is time for the government to address what they're doing with the hospice service. My new wife is chair of a hospice in Tauranga, and I know that they have severe financial issues because really of the lack of government funding. They have to fundraise like heck to keep that hospice afloat because there is more and more demand for its services. And if government can see their way to become a more efficient health service or offer a more efficient health service, they should certainly be looking at the hospice service to make that way more efficient as well.
Okay, Simon, I was going to ask you, but I think I've found it, your email that you sent out to supporters. So the review, if people want to have some input, they have to do it by the 26th of September, which is just over 2 weeks away. And I was just having a look on our website. If you go to the latest news and media on familyfirst.nz and just scroll down, you'll see a article about, I think, about euthanasia, about doing the review. So, Simon, you would say get involved. It may feel like people aren't listening and they won't take any notice of your submission, but we'll lose every fight that we don't even show up for.
Yeah, I think it's important to turn up to these fights, to use that analogy, no matter what the result may or may not be. The other encouragement I'd give people is like a lot of government surveys. There's lots of questions that can be very frustrating. They often, like these in the euthanasia space, are trying to lead you down a particular angle. So my encouragement to viewers is, if you have a view, know that you can literally go to the last question. I think it's question 19, but it doesn't really matter. You can go literally to the last question and just put in your general comments. I mean, obviously, if you feel drawn to do all of the questions, then go for it. But you don't have to answer every question. Put your thoughts at the end. And as you say, Bob, they can jump on to obviously our emailing list or onto our website, and they can get insights from our perspective, which they can then put into their own voice.
Yeah, and I've just found it's under research and issues on our website. So go to familyfirst.nz, go to research and issues, and it's the first one, a review of the End of Life Choice Act survey. It's a survey, but like Simon says, don't do this if you're currently at school, but just go to the last question and slam your whole answer in that last question. If you do that for your NCEA, you might not pass. But anyway, that's us for a night. We're done well, team. It's only 7 minutes overdue, and we sort of didn't get through every topic. We did the important ones, I think. So thank you, Peter. Great job. Ate, Brendan, thank you for rushing back from your school meeting. Simon, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock for Solid Ground, and you'll be continuing some of these themes, I assume. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, if I wake up, I'll be there.
Yeah. Okay, I'll wake you up if you haven't. I'll send a dog around to bark outside your window. And Michael, thank you very much. Thank you, team. And we will be back next Monday night at 8 o'clock. Until then, have a great week.